What's up, guys? Stephen Bogren here, Pro Physique. Today, what I'm going to be talking about is one of the articles in the new issue of Mass. Is more frequency better for strength and hypertrophy gains? Alright, so what's up, everybody? Happy friggin' New Year. 2018 is here. It is upon us. So let's get to it, right? I know a lot of you guys are like, you're looking at everything. There's a lot of information out there. What do you trust? What don't you trust? Well, if there's one person you can trust, it is Greg Nuckols and Eric Helms and all the other guys over there at Mass putting out, it is the monthly application of sport science. And it's probably one of the best, made to understand research-based publications out there right now. And so if you don't have yourself a subscription to it, I recommend highly that you get one. It's my mom. Hold on. Yes, Mom. All right, Mom talks over. Awesome. So now let me digress from why I think Mass is probably one of the better articles out there that you can check out. Let's get to the nitty-gritty, which is the article in itself, talking about whether or not more frequency is better. So frequency is the amount of times per week that you are training a muscle group. So that's like if I go and do legs once a week, my frequency is 1. If I go and do legs twice a week, my frequency is twice. 3 times a week, 3, right? That is training frequency. Now, this study looked at training frequency for equated volume. So it had people working out 2 days a week. And so essentially you can think about this as a study that we actually ran over at USF. So the people that worked out twice a week did 4 sets. The people that worked out 4 times a week did 2 sets. So they were doing the same amount of total volume relatively, right? So that's what they were looking at. And their overall findings were similar to what we found. No significant difference. There was no significant difference between gains in hypertrophy or strength, lean body mass for people working out at a lower frequency versus people working out at a higher frequency. So they both met that minimum kind of 2 days a week and the 4 days a week. So we didn't see a big difference between the two. Now, this study, and they mention it in the Mass article, they found differences in effect sizes, which means essentially that even though there might not be a significant difference, that the lower frequency still had argumentative evidence for why it might be better, right? So it might just be better. However, and the article will explain this to you as well, they did some very not so normal things with how they got that effect size on the lower frequency group. And so, but the gist of it is if you're looking at differences in strength and hypertrophy, there were no significant differences. And actually the higher frequency group had a bigger standard deviation, which means that some people had a much lower change and some people had a much higher change. Whereas the lower frequency group, everybody, the standard deviation, was kind of closer to the same amount. Also, the training status of these individuals. So the training status of these individuals was definitely left room for question as well. What I like to see and for training status is that there's a baseline testing. So you have to be able to bench 1.25% of your body weight. You have to be able to squat 1.5 times your body weight. You have to be able to deadlift 2 times your body weight. Things like that, right? Because just because somebody's resistance trained for a certain amount of time doesn't mean that they're necessarily strength trained or that they have all the correct neurological adaptations for strength training and for weight training. So when we're looking at things like 1RM, percentage-based training, these things matter. So we want to be aware of that when we're looking at these studies. And then one of the things that I really wanted to look at was, was there really any difference between our study at USF that we ran and this study? I didn't see a lot of differences in how the frequency was set up. There was definitely differences in the training setup. We did not use, sets to 12 and then failure. So I think that obviously is a big deal right there. So let's sort of stop, time out on I'm not talking about the studies. Let's talk about the actual idea of is more frequency better. We know absolutely without a doubt that 2 times a week for a muscle group is better than 1 time a week for a muscle group. The data is clear, right? So in terms of frequency, if you're training a muscle group once a week and you move to training it twice a week, you're going to get better. You're going to get stronger. You're going to get bigger. That's just how it's going to go. But now, is 3 times a week better than 2 times a week? And is 4 times a week better than 2 times a week? This is now the question that we need to answer. So, the question, I think, comes down to MRV within training sessions. Well, so maximal recoverable volume within session, right? If I have to go in and I have to squat, 7, 8 sets of 12 in one day, or in 2 days, right? So, say 2 days, much easier to handle that, right? I'm not doing anywhere near as much damage. I'm not taking as long to get through that workout. It's just easier. So as your training age progresses, your training has to also progress, which means that we have to continue to increase volume, whether that means lifting more weight for the same amount of reps and sets, or adding reps and sets with the same amount of weight, or different amounts of weight, right? So our total volume increases. We have to be increasing volume. So at the very least, we have to increase muscular strain, right? So we know there's a couple aspects of it. I'll digress. But having more training sessions helps to take that volume, right? So say I have this much volume, right? Well, if I have 2 training sessions, I have to split that in half, right? So if I can handle that and I can recover well from that, and that's okay. But at some point, as volume increases, so does the breakdown of volume increase, right? So now, instead of having 2 training sessions that are here, I have to have 2 training sessions that are here for each muscle, for that muscle group each time a week. Now, at some point, I'm going to have issues recovering from that and dealing with it. At that point, I think higher frequency is going to be better, and this is going to be my argument, and you can agree with it or not. Higher frequency will now be beneficial because instead of having these 2 big blocks, I can break that into 3 blocks. 1, 2, 3. And now, I'm not going to be doing as much damage and as much stress to the muscle each session. I can now recover better. My opinion is that frequency helps you to manage recovery. Recovery should be a huge thought process behind your training. If you're not recovering well, we need to do something to address that. We need to recover and adapt to our training sessions. So if we can't do that, that's something we want to address so that we can maximize what we're doing. We don't want to be putting in a bunch of hard work to have nothing to show for it. We want to make sure that our hard work is paying off. So that is my big thing on frequency. Adding in more frequency with the same volume isn't necessarily going to do you any better, right? But if you're having issues recovering, I think that is where the argument for more frequency comes in, because you can now manage that better, and you can now take that to where you can adapt to your training stimulus, and you're not consistently overreaching or overtraining or under-recovering, whatever it is that you want to call it. So I think that this study shows that as long as volume is pretty steady, and the USF study will show this as well, there's not any huge difference. Maybe a little bit in body composition and some other factors, but in terms of strength and muscle growth for an improvement season. So keep that in mind when you are putting together your training guys, and you're looking at your blocks and looking at how you want to set things up. These are just one more thing to consider for how you function and where your volume and your training age is at. If you're at a lower training age, I don't think you have to worry about it as much. Just go in and do something, But for the more experienced lifters, you definitely want to pay attention to these different variables. But anyways, that's it, guys. 2018, a new year, new you. What's the frequency going to be? All right. So anyways, I will talk to you soon. Have a great one, guys.